The stories shared in this podcast reflect personal experiences and perspectives. While names and identifying details may be changed, these accounts are told truthfully to the best of our knowledge. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as fact about any specific individual or organisation without independent verification. Our intention is to share experiences, not to cause harm or defame. This podcast deals with themes of emotional abuse, manipulation, and deception. We share these stories not to sensationalise, but to understand how it happens, why it's so hard to see from the inside, and what it takes to break free. We want to create a safe space for truth-telling and awareness for victims of relationship abuse and their loved ones, even if it's just finding the language to talk about their experiences. Because abuse rarely reveals itself all at once, it builds, slowly and quietly, until the ground shifts beneath you. Please take care while listening.
I can't forget what you said. It was reckless to use those words. Now I'm stuck on you, and I keep having these dreams where you run away from me, and I know it's not real, but I'm lost on how to
Hello, hi, and welcome to Beyond Curious, the podcast. I'm your host, Keeks, and this season you will hear a story that is, in a word, wild. But it is also incredibly real, devastating, mind-bending, and infuriating at the same time. We haven't used real names without permission to do so, but the voices and stories you will hear are the lived experiences of the people sharing them. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, 2.3 million women and 1.3 million men in Australia have experienced emotional abuse by a current or previous partner, and 1 in 4 women and 1 in 14 men experience violence from an intimate partner. This is Jesse's story. In the beginning, it was a story of finding that forever love, the kind of connection that feels fated somehow. But then it became a story about cancer, and then a story about attachment, and then mental illness and the tangled web of childhood trauma with a touch of dissociative identity. And then it became a story about displacement, racial discrimination, drug abuse, sexual identity, kink, compulsive sexual behaviour, parental alienation, misogyny, privilege, infidelity, and Tom Hardy. But actually, this is a story about relationship abuse. As is the case with every story of relationship abuse, it is complex, contradictory, and challenges the way we think about love, power, and choice. Okay, so let's talk about cancer and how this really is not a story about cancer at all. But I think, Jess, we would both say emphatically that it sets the scene. But why did you want to set that boundary right from the start?
Cancer is one of the main reasons I stayed in the relationship. It hooked me in really early, and it also then gave a reason to justify certain behaviors that should have been massive red flags for me. And it also gave him a huge excuse for his behaviors. And so I think whilst this isn't the story, because cancer on its own is really tragic and hard to deal with, particularly in a new relationship, I think it's really important just to highlight that the dynamics that kicked off because of that are the reason why I stayed.
Absolutely. And I think also just something you've said to me so many times is that by the end of the story, you sometimes forget about the cancer completely, but it very much did set the scene and the stage. So
yeah, it's It's something that makes me giggle, actually. In amongst all of the devastation, I look back and go, "Oh, wait, cancer was a thing. Okay."
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So then let's get into the details of your relationship with Daniel. And as all good stories do, let's start at the very beginning. How did you actually meet?
So I was going through a thing in my life, and I don't know what that thing was. It was probably, we ebb and flow through the need for connection. I hit a point where I thought, I'm going to jump on and have a look at the apps. I don't know why. It's torture for most people, but I did it. And I came across Danny, and it was easy. It was this beautiful man presenting himself as someone who just wanted light and joy in his life. And that's something that I wanted too.
Okay, so before we actually go into the details of your relationship with Daniel and how you met and those early days, can I just ask why you want to share this story and in this way now?
This is something I've asked myself a lot. It's not an easy story to tell nor remember. I guess one reason is selfish. I have been out of this relationship for nearly a year now,
Mm.
and I have told this story to you, to my family, to my therapist over and over again. And it's all still really loud in my head, and I still have so many questions about the why of it all. So I guess walking through it and piecing it together in this way gives me some structure. The other reason is the bigger reason, and that is because this isn't a rare thing. You see it everywhere, all around you, people that you have these discussions and you learn that people have been through very similar situations. So I think hearing
Or
other
know
people
someone who have
all
been
know
through,
someone. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think for me, being able to look at other people's experiences, look at the language they're using, see how predictable a lot of this stuff is,
Mm.
was super helpful. So I guess I would hope that if someone's listening to this, they can recognize some signs, learn the language that surrounds what's happening to them, and maybe use it as a way to find their way out or at least feel less alone in the situation. So yeah, for me, it's about anyone who's ever found themselves stuck or are stuck in these
Mm.
situations.
It makes so much sense, and that untangling of it for yourself and opening up a conversation potentially for other people. It's a really powerful and scary thing. So let's rewind for a minute before Daniel even came into the picture. Who were you then? What was your headspace around love and relationships? Were you looking for a partner? What kind of partner were you looking for? Tell us about Jesse.
At the time, I'd reached a point in my life where I really thought I knew who I was. I thought I was super independent, somewhat ambitious. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't super ambitious, but there was ambition in there. I, I think I was always open to becoming a better human. I just thought I'd had it figured out. I thought I knew who I was. I have an incredible group of friends. I'm really proud of my friendships. And so I never really thought I needed someone. Of course, there'd been
Mm.
times in my life where, I'd had relationships and I'd wanted connection with people. But at that point, I wasn't looking for a life partner, or I've
Mm.
never been one for marriage or children. I'm at a point in my life where children aren't an option anymore. So yeah, I thought I knew what I wanted. I have a great family and I have a great connection with my family as well. I have a home that I share with my beautiful mother, two beautiful dogs. Like everything just seemed to be fine and in
Mm.
place. And I was happy. I do need to be honest though. I think that whilst, my life had fallen into place and I've had a big life and, lots of experiences, but I have always been a more anxious person and I've lived with this anxiety in my social interactions, in work. And so I kind of flip flop, if you like, between this confidence and independence, but
Mm.
also feeling quite anxious at times. I'm really good at masking it. I think if you ask
Yeah.
people around me, they wouldn't pick that. But I think deep down, these old patterns that I carried with anxiety probably made me more open to someone like Danny.
Okay, so let's start talking about Daniel. How did you meet? When did you meet? What were you looking for? What drew you to seeking a relationship at that time?
I don't think there was any kind of specific driver. I think I just was at a point in my life where I kind of wanted connection. A lot of people around me had partners and it looked nice. So I thought I'd give it a go. And, in the modern world, it's really, really quite challenging to meet someone out and about. So I jumped in on the apps, which is torturous in a way, but it was actually quite easy this time around. I'd done it in the past and it
Mm.
hadn't been a great experience, but this time was different. I remember swiping and I just saw this gigantic smile on my screen, this really beautiful, beaming, genuine looking smile. And that was Danny, and it immediately caught my attention. And so I liked him. He had a great profile. He seemed like he didn't take himself too seriously. He was
Mm.
fun. He was successful. He had a clip of himself playing this song, which was really witty about what it would be like dating him. And we matched pretty much. And so it
What was
became
in the song?
I don't remember. It was on the piano and he's a very impressive piano player. So and I love music. So, I'm a sucker for a musician. And it was funny. I remember it being funny. So yeah, I just thought, this is someone who looks like they just want to have a happy, fun time. And I thought he'd be someone who might bring some lightness into my life.
So you swiped right. What were the initial conversations like? How did he chat? How did he present himself in the one-dimensional conversation of the internet?
I love that one-dimensional conversation of the internet. He presented in written word the same way he did on his app. He, again, was easygoing, he was funny, but also in a attentive kind of way. Like, he wasn't just giving me one-liners and asking for nudes. He was just a nice guy having good conversation. He sent me an Earth, Wind& and Fire song, which has always stuck with me, and I was
Because you
going
love Earth, Wind& and Fire, or
yeah, I do, and I was going through a phase, and I actually had a playlist with a lot of Earth, Wind& and Fire on it, so, it resonated at the time, and so talking about what a suitable first date is, we talked about going ice skating and, the logistics of that on a first date. I did not agree to going ice skating because I
fair.
can't.
Something a bit romantic about falling into someone's arms, but, when you hit the ice and yeah,
Yeah.
not so romantic first date
I
material.
opted out. So we didn't do that for a first date. We,
Mm.
just agreed to go for a walk, which was nice.
So, when you actually meet him, how long have you been chatting for? What's the gap between the conversations and meeting in person?
I don't think there was too much discussion. I think it was a solid week or 2 maybe. I was also at a point where, I hadn't dated anyone in a very long time.
Mm.
And to be honest, it was a bit of a chore having to communicate with someone in that way, and so I got really lazy about actually going on a date. But yeah, when we did eventually go on a date, and it was really nice. He presented in exactly the same way he did on his, profile, and so when I first saw him, it was that same beaming smile. He looked so happy to be there. He was super complimentary of me and, not overly charming, but conversation was so easy between us, and I think there were a lot of alignments between us. So in terms of career and what
Mm.
we'd studied and where we'd been in the world, and our values seemed to align as well. So it just seemed really easy in the beginning.
So who is Danny? As in, you've spoken a bit about what you've studied and the alignment in those values. Who is he?
He is super impressive on paper. So which was also part of the attraction, I suppose.
Mm.
He is a PhD qualified psychotherapist. He had been a professor at one point. He owned his own business. He spoke 5 languages. He played music. He had this like European worldliness about him, and there was something magnetic about him. And he liked a joke. He's very witty as well. And
Mm.
so, yeah, he appeared to be all of the things that I would want in my life.
So just a bit of a larger than life kind of character.
Yeah, he was. Not in an overwhelming kind of way, though. I think it made me feel really safe, which was
Mm.
unusual because, I do have those underlying anxious feelings a lot of the time in social situations, particularly with people I've never met. And so it didn't seem hard in any way.
And Did you know he had kids before you met him in person, or did that all
Well,
come out in this first date?
I didn't know that from our app conversation.
How did you feel when that came out?
Look, I hadn't planned on having children in my life, and so he kinda threw it on me, but he did it so casually, like, it wasn't something that he
Mm,
was, reluctant to tell me. It was just a part of his life, and that was that. And so my knee-jerk thought is, "Oh my god, kids. There goes my
mm.
freedom. They tie you down. I don't want that." But at the same time, my response was kind of to prove to him how good I am with kids. Like, I had to show him, like, "Oh, I'm surrounded by them. I've got plenty of nieces
I
and
know kids.
nephews." So, trying to hold on to my own views about children while also kind of already bending to fit into his picture. And so I kind of did that by, making jokes with him about the burden of being a parent. Yeah, it was strange behavior on my part, I think, at that.
Well, not really though, because one thing I do know about you is you're very fun. You're a very funny guy. You're a that's humor is very central to your communication more broadly, but you genuinely just bring a lot of lightness and levity to all conversations. So it's not really unusual behavior for you at all. But I am curious how he responded to that part of who you are, which is my favorite thing about you. But how he responded to that.
Yeah, he went along with it. He tended to agree, and I think most parents would. Kids are hard work, and so it just didn't become a thing.
Mm,
It flowed on from there, and I think, like, he didn't tell me until towards, mid-end date as well, so I'd already
mm.
spent this time with him and sort of realized, "Oh, this is someone I actually like." So, it didn't really kill the vibe for either of us, I don't think. I think he knew where I
And
was coming from, and I heard him, and it was nice.
did he talk much about his ex-partner or the dynamic of the co-parenting relationship or where he was at in that journey?
Yeah, I did obviously once he told me he had children, assumed that they had a mother, and so I asked him about that relationship, and he didn't go into great detail, but he kind of alluded to, they are divorced and
Mm.
they are co-parent, and his exact words were, "I just am Jesus," meaning, he doesn't
I'm
disagree with
Jesus.
her, he doesn't do anything to upset the dynamic, so, he just goes with the flow for the sake of co-parenting.
A really odd choice of words, but yeah, okay, sure. And did was he asking you lots of questions about you, or him was he reciprocal in that interest in your life and who you were as a person too?
Yeah, he is a great conversationalist, and,
Mm,
I mean, knowing his profession, he's a
yeah.
therapist, he is really good at conversation, and I guess that's how I found out anyway how our experiences in life had aligned. We spoke about our
Mm,
careers and our families. We covered a broad range of topics, and it was mutual. It
mm.
was just 2 adults having conversation.
In terms of attraction, obviously you do get a sense on a first date of whether or not there's something, romantic there. Were you finding yourself attracted to him? Were you picking that up from him? What was that vibe like?
Yeah, I think the ease of how everything just flowed was super
Mm.
attractive for me, like, that it just
Yeah, yeah.
wasn't a task, and so that in itself was, great. He is a handsome man, and I was physically attracted to him. The kids
Mm.
really threw me, and so, it wasn't like this love at first sight situation. I could be this person's friend, or I could be in this person's life, so I ended the date happy,
Yeah,
and there was no regret at all, and, like, those feelings of the
yeah.
laziness in me, I was kind of like, "Oh, I'm really glad I came." And, of course, I wanted to see him again after that.
Did he bring up his health?
There was a part of the date, so I had shared with him, we were talking about our careers, and one of my dear friends and someone who I'd worked with for a long time had passed away from cancer. She had pancreatic cancer, and it spread to her lungs, and she passed away during COVID. And so I had shared that with him, and he told me this story about how when he separated from his ex-wife,
Mm.
he had to sell his motorcycle, and it had fallen on his leg, and he had an injury, and that it wasn't healing. And so he went and got it checked out, and it turned out it was a bone tumor. So he had had a bone tumor removed. And I think like that was recent history. Like it hadn't happened too long before I met him. And, I sort of joked and I was like, well, that's a brilliant story. Not that cancer is ever a brilliant story, but the brilliance of it was of how he found out and the
Yeah,
fact that he
yeah.
was alive. And so he had told me he had gone through chemotherapy after the tumor was removed and that everything was clear and that he was fully recovered.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story, actually.
Mm.
And did you talk much about what you said before that you had spoken about your career? What did you share with him about your professional background and those critical parts of who you are?
I think this is a really important part of our connection because I think, it's rare you come across someone who's worked in a lot of the spaces you have. And in a date context, he had a history working with refugee, torture, and trauma
Mm.
patients. He understood humanitarian settlement as being a refugee himself. He'd gone through that process. And so, I studied psychology. I then worked in child protection. I moved into asylum seeker and humanitarian settlement programs.
Mm.
So a lot of that he deeply understood. And so we had really rich conversations from that. I think I can't say I've ever been on a date where a man has been interested in me talking about my experience in these programs. So
Yeah.
it was a good point of connection for us.
So you leave the date and you covered off so many different things and, definitely an interest in seeing this person again, and it's easy and it's comfortable, and you do decide to go on a second date. What's the time span between the first and the second date?
We had actually arranged for a second date, I think it was a week or so later, and I had woken up with this gnarly red eye, which I
That's right.
jokingly said was pink eye, and I think I texted you at the time with a picture of my eye,
You did.
and I was like, "Well, I kind of can't go on this date." But at
With
the
pink
same
eye.
time, I had pink eye, and I was kind of feeling lazy about it as well. So it just seemed like
Mm.
a convenient excuse for me because should mention as well, he lives about an hour and 15 minutes away from me. So
Yeah.
we had agreed that I would go to him on the second date because he came to me. And so, I
It
was
was
feeling
also what was the month? It was December?
yeah, I
Sort of
first met
end of
him in
year. Yeah.
December of 23, yeah. So, things were wrapping up. Everyone's a bit like, "Oh, the holidays are coming." So,
Yeah.
I kinda didn't really wanna go, but I also did wanna see him again. So, I'd actually cancelled our second date, and then we arranged for me to go and meet him, and we went out to dinner somewhere near his house. So, I think it was
So, I'm
probably 2 weeks after the first.
just gonna interrupt you because my memory of you talking about this is that he opened the door shirtless.
He did. So
Yeah.
I drove to his house and I got there and I was like, "Oh, is it the place?" I
Mm.
hadn't been there before. And he opened the door shirtless and not ready to go yet. Like he'd literally just jumped out of the shower. And so it was kind of like
Were you
a little disarming, but it was kind of like, come in, take a seat. I'll be ready in a minute." And so I just
wait, were
sat.
you early or were
No, I
was
wasn't early.
right,
I
okay.
was right on time, and so he kind of just rushed himself together while I sat in his, lounge room, looking around, observing all of the things, seeing if everything checked out, and it seemed to.
Was
And
it
then after that,
awkward or creepy or
it wasn't super awkward, like, I was a little bit anxious about it, safety first, but I had shared my location with you. If I die, at least someone will know where my phone was last, so
ladies always share your location with someone
always.
before a first date. Safety first.
Safety first. And so we hadn't planned to have the date at his house. We were just meeting there. And
Mm.
he drove us both to his friend's restaurant and we had dinner and it was lovely. And then, we did the walk the streets talking. And then we ended up going back to his house and I didn't stay because I am not a second date wonder. And so uh, we had a great night. And I think I left maybe about 11 o'clock. And I think I immediately called you when I
You
left
did, yeah.
property.
Mm.
So, slightly more excited than I was the first date, I think. Still
Yeah.
slightly hesitant. So,
You just seem to really like him.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And I
There
think
was
you felt like you were a bit shocked by how much you liked him.
Yeah, wasn't planning on finding someone to connect with, you know. I thought I was dating casually, and I kind of started getting inklings of like, oh, maybe I could really like this person. Like maybe it would work as something more. So yeah, it kind of raised the stakes a little bit.
So talk to me about how it evolved from there. How did your relationship build on from that early foundation?
Yeah, so after our second date, I think there was already this really strong pull between us, and that night it started to feel like we were crossing into something more serious, not, you know, not fully committed at a second date, but the chemistry was certainly there. So it didn't seem like this attraction anymore or this, oh, maybe anymore. It felt like a real connection with another human being. And so I really felt myself leaning in to the possibility of what it could be. I think looking back, that's where the momentum really picked up. And I was getting the same signals from him. He seemed just as interested as I was. And so I stopped being this cautious, anxious me and just started investing in getting to know this person wholly. And so I think, you know, as our dating continued and I started staying the night at his house, you know, I had to disclose some things to him about my history, and he was always really gentle and kind and accepting of who I was and what I'd been through in the past. And so, yeah, it just felt really safe in the beginning. We had spent a whole day together at one point. I think this moment stands out for me because this is where I really think I just fell over the edge and I was like, "Oh my god, I love this guy." And so I think, you know, I had initially told him I hadn't dated anyone in a long time, and I hadn't been on a date for years before I met him. And mind you, he was the only person on the apps that I had gone on a date with.
Mm,
And so he had mistakenly thought that because I hadn't dated anyone, that I hadn't been with anyone. And
right.
so when I sort of clarified with him, oh no, I've actually, you know, I see people just casually. And he kind of seemed taken aback by that. I remember we'd gone out for breakfast at a cafe and I'd shared that with him, and then he just kind of kept bringing it up. And it was kind of the first strange moment for me because he's this super confident guy. He had been really open about his sexuality and how he'd been exploring it since his divorce. And so
Mm,
it just seemed odd to me that he was shocked that I'd been seeing men without dating them. And
yeah.
so,
I mean, did you go into detail about that, or were you just sort of saying, "Oh no, it's
no, I was kind of just correcting his perception that I'd been
right,
sitting on my own for 4 years. And so he kept bringing it up. He kept circling back to it, and it felt really strange. But I kind of brushed it off. I was like, "Oh, you know, it was news." And
yeah,
I
a
was
bit of
starting to fall for
jealousy,
him.
or
Yeah, so I just kind of put it aside. And then at that cafe, this is probably the moment that it happened for me. He leaned over and he just, like, showered my cheek with kisses, like
mm,
we were like we'd known each other forever and we'd been together forever, and I think that was it. That was where I tipped over into this real vulnerability, like, "Oh, shit, I really like this guy," and then the power sort of shifted at that point. And
mm,
I started feeling really anxious, and knowing who he is, he's a psychotherapist, he understands attachment styles and all of the likes, and so I got really paranoid about not wanting to be too much, not wanting to be
yeah,
too little, like the balance, like everyone does, I suppose. I remember after one time I stayed at his house and it was his birthday the next day, and he didn't tell me until the night before, and so when I'd left, I arranged for flowers to get delivered to his house. And, you know, I hadn't really done that for men in years. You know, I have
very
done
sweet of you.
very sweet, I thought. Someone's birthday, you know, and, you know, a
Yeah,
lot of his family are overseas, so I thought, "Why not?" And then I kinda just didn't hear from him all day, and I remember being really worried that I'd crossed some kinda line or I'd picked up wrong signals, and he, didn't message me until very late in the evening, and it seemed a little bit off there, and so I started getting really, anxious about what was happening between us.
mm. Did you feel so you're when you're starting to fall into well, when you're starting to fall, right? Were you feeling that emotional intensity from him? So was it were you, like, matching each other's energy at that stage?
Well, on one hand, when we were together or when we did communicate, he was super enthusiastic. And so, you know, full of charm, full of the affection. And so it made me feel like something was really building between us. But then there were just these in-between moments, right, where,
Yeah.
the communication was really inconsistent. So he'd go quiet and I wouldn't hear from him for a while. And then sometimes his responses were, like, completely lackluster. There was nothing there. So it started to get really confusing because I'd tipped over into this vulnerable space, but I then all of a sudden couldn't really quite tell where
Mm.
he was standing.
Yeah. So you're kind of in that in between space, feeling pulled in by the enthusiasm, but also sitting in those gaps, and that's super uncomfortable. Does he like me as much as I like him? Which is very normal, like early relationship sort of dynamics. But then things shift again, right? Because not long after that, you have a pretty big conversation about what each of you are looking for. Can you take me back to that moment?
Yeah, it was actually a phone call, and I remember it quite clearly because his mum had come over to visit him from overseas, and so, that was also a reason where I was kind of like, "Okay, well, maybe he's just busy with his mum
Yeah.
sometimes." And so he wanted to have this phone call for us to just, stay connected. I think that were the exact words he used was, "Can we chat to stay connected?" And I was like, "Of course we can." And so we hadn't seen each other face to face for a while. But then he calls me, and then the conversation steered into this, "Well, we haven't had this conversation yet. What are you looking for?" And so, given how I was already
Love that
feeling,
conversation.
so he hits me with the, "What are you looking for in a relationship conversation?" And so I kind of was taken aback because I didn't know. I had been
Yeah.
caught up in this whirlwind of like, "Oh, here's someone I really love spending time with." But then I hadn't thought about logistics. I hadn't thought about
Yeah.
the fact that he has children or that we live so far apart or that I
Well,
never
that you have
cohabitate with anyone. So
well, yeah, and that you have this very serene life that you built purposely to stay serene and were not looking to interrupt. And so then how do those two things mesh? It's yeah, not
exactly.
easy.
It kind of hit me. I hadn't thought about it at all. And so I mostly just listened to what he had to say. I kind of just counted and said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And then the conversation just, I wouldn't say snowballed, but in my head it was snowballing. He started talking about his belief in ethical non-monogamy
Mm.
and how he's had good and bad experiences with it, and how much he hated possessive relationships. And he was super clear about wanting this sexual dynamic that was really vibrant with a partner and really just wanted to
Mhm.
explore lots of things. He went through the idea of polyamory with me, and I kind of was like, "Oh, no, that doesn't sound great."
Had this
Um,
on the phone too.
yeah, wow. And so
Yeah.
I wasn't really voicing my opinions. I just sat there and listened mostly. I
Mm.
didn't know what to respond with, and I didn't because I didn't know how to respond meaningfully. I I don't think I could find the words either. I think it was yeah.
But also, had you ever really thought about your feelings about had you ever been in a position where someone saying, "Hey, are you into polyamory and ethical
Yeah.
non-monogamy?" Like, is that did you have a particular viewpoint on it before this conversation started for you as a person?
For me, I'd always been pretty stoic about traditional relationships not being practical. And so I could easily see where he was coming from in that way. He had been divorced as well, so I could understand. But also I know myself and I know
Mm.
that that's not something that I could live with. And so I was sort of teetering between going, yeah, I can see where you're coming from with these ideas in terms of non-standard
Mm.
arrangements. And
Mhm.
so I did agree with him about that, the toxicity of this codependency that can develop. And, I've always understood there are different ways to structure relationships. But then after the phone call, well, after we hung up, I kind of sat on it for a while and I thought, and then I was like, no, actually, I just kind of want to
Mm.
be with someone. And I messaged him and I was pretty open about it. I said, look, I hear everything that you're saying. But for me, I just wanna love, and I just wanna be loved by someone in
Yeah.
a committed partnership. And so his response to me was quite surprising because I thought, "Oh, this is probably gonna be where we part."
Yeah, sure.
Like, he writes back to me, "That all makes sense, babe. So now we know where we stand. It's all good." And I was like, "Okay, but do you do you want that? Is that what you
What
want
does
with
that
me?"
mean?
After that big conversation about all the options. And so I asked him directly and I was like, "Is that what you want?" And then he replies with, "Yeah, I'm cool with that. Poly's not my thing." And so the whole conversation seemed
It
strange in hindsight because you're like, "Well, if it isn't, why'd you bring it up?" Like,
what was that? Yeah, that's it. It sounded very much like that indeed was his thing.
yeah, I mean, someone who knew a lot about it and felt the need to talk a lot about it, you know? I think the default is, well, yeah, traditionally, uh, when 2 people come together, they wanna be together, and
Yeah.
I think
So
you don't need to explain anything outside of that, but maybe that's just my ignorance, you know?
it was confusing. Absolutely. Definitely confusing. So on paper, you got the answer that you wanted, and he's saying he's fine with commitment. Poly isn't his thing, but you're feeling unsettled. Did you did you believe him in that moment when he was agreeing to being in a committed relationship? Was the energy that you were getting off of him matching his words? How did that sit with you?
I think part of me was desperate to believe him because, I'd already
Mm.
tipped over, I'd fallen for this person, and so I almost needed to, and so he gave me just enough reassurance to quiet the doubts. So even though the way that he had said it to me felt a little bit flat, a little bit dismissive even, I held on to that. And so instead of sitting with that dissonance of like, wait, does he, doesn't he, doesn't
Mm.
align, I kind of just focused on the breadcrumbs he threw at me, the things, he was calling me babe and the charm when we were together. And it was super warm when
Mm.
we were together. And I felt really special with him. It was like I started building this story around the best bits of him and pushed aside all the bits that didn't quite line up. I think looking back, that was probably the beginning of me training myself to sort of live in his gaps between, what I had hoped for in this relationship
Mm.
and what he was actually giving me.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful way of putting it. You're training yourself to live in the gaps, right? Because not much time passes before those gaps start to get even bigger. And there was a big stretch of time where he went very quiet and the energy dipped and you kind of had to sit in the gaps for a fairly long time. Can you talk about that period and what that was like for you and how you were making sense of it at the time?
Yeah, it was a really jarring shift for me. We'd had these intense moments, these big
Mm.
conversations about, what are you looking for? And then, suddenly there'd be nothing and the messages slowed down to almost nothing. And then when he did reply, it was really short and vague. Like his mind was just somewhere else entirely. And so at first I told myself, he's a busy dude. His mum
Mm.
was still around. He had a whole life full of people and things and children that I wasn't really a part of yet.
Yeah.
So I kept rationalizing that, and I kept, "Don't be needy, don't push, just give him space." But the truth is, it kinda hurt a little bit, it started with this
Mm.
big bang. Well, not necessarily a big bang, but a big alignment, a big connection, and so I'd already crossed that emotional line. So when he started getting silent, it just got louder and louder, and so instead of seeing it as a warning sign, I took it as a challenge almost. If I just hang in,
Mm.
if I stay patient, maybe I get back to the version of him that made me feel special. And so I kind of just did. I mean, I got frustrated and I teetered in and out of going, screw this guy. I'm an
Yeah.
independent woman. I don't need a man. But yeah, the connection was too much for me to let go of.
But also you weren't very you hadn't been together very long at this point. We're only at, what is it, 3 months, 2 months?
Yeah, it was pretty early on. I think probably February we're
Mhm.
talking, this starts
Yeah.
happening. And we'd only met early December the year before. So yeah, 3
Yeah.
months-ish.
So you're sitting in the silence and, just kind of bargaining with
Mm.
yourself to be patient. And then, of course, he does come back around again because that's the rhythm, right? It was the push and the pull. What was it like for you when he finally reappeared with that enthusiasm again? Was it relief or were you experiencing a bit of hesitation and starting to see a sense of a pattern of how he would show up?
By this point, the cancer had come into the fold. So,
Mm.
when his mum did arrive in the country, she had COVID. And so he had caught the COVID off her. And so it made sense for me to give him space. He was unwell. And then he'd messaged me saying that he had been taken to the ICU because of his COVID. And he was having trouble breathing and holding food down. And so after he'd returned home from the hospital, he then texted me asking if we could talk. And he was alluding to these concerns around his health. And so the next morning, like early in the morning before work, we spoke on the phone, and I kind of just forgot about all the quiet moments previously.
Mm.
So during that phone call, he had said to me that his cancer had come back, and he didn't know what it meant for him. But I think I do recall his words were, "I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to be the man that you need." So I had said to him, "Well, should we stop seeing each other then?" And his response was, "Absolutely no. No, I wanna keep seeing you." And then I had said, "Well, will you let me support you through this?" And he was like, "Absolutely not." And so it was kind of, again, just within this short
Yeah.
conversation, this push or pull between, "What do you want, sir? Do you want me around? Do you not want me around? Like, how are we gonna do this?" And so the whole dynamic shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't about whether he was hot or cold, it was about he needed me, and I wanted to rise to that. And
Yeah.
so it just pulled me in deeper.
How much did he actually tell you about his diagnosis in this phone call?
It was super vague, like surface
Mm.
level information. Like he just needed me to know the headline and that was it. But I do remember pausing and asking him directly, "Do you actually want to keep seeing me?" I gave him that out because there was a part of
Mm.
me that thought maybe this is his way of backing out. But he didn't take it, he opted in. He told me he wanted to keep seeing me, and that was it. That was the hook. And once he
Yeah.
said yes, I felt like I couldn't step out. The cancer became both a reason for hanging around, but also his excuse for everything that followed.
So even though he didn't share much detail, the fact that he chose to be in and said he wanted to keep seeing you carried so much weight for you. What did that mean for you emotionally? Like, do you feel the second he said yes, you had a responsibility to stand by him no matter what came next? Or was it more just of a day by day vibe for you?
Honestly, it was such a confusing emotional time.
Yeah.
On one hand, I kept thinking, people with cancer deserve love too. Why should a diagnosis make someone unlovable or mean they don't get to have relationships? But on the other hand, this fear crept in, like this genuine fear. What if I fall in love with him and he just
Mm.
drops dead? I couldn't
Yeah.
make sense of it. And so my brain was just literally split in two. There was one part of me that's trying to be super compassionate and open-hearted, and then there's another part screaming, "Protect yourself."
Yeah. And I think that other aspect is it was 2 months. This is, maybe 3 at this point. It's so early, and so you're having all of those normal early relationship experiences and feelings and desires and all that kind of stuff overlaid with, "Oh, I now have to decide if I'm gonna stay around and find out if this person will be here." It's a lot.
Layered on top of that was the fact that it was, like you say, so early in our relationship, and I didn't feel like I had the right to ask him many questions or to insert myself too deeply in his life, so I was constantly trying to balance, like, what's my role here? Am I his
Mm,
partner, his support, or am I just somebody he's very early stages dating? And
mhm.
so it became this impossible line to walk, and I don't think I ever found solid ground on it. It really set the tone for what was to come.
Absolutely, and he had on your first date, he had mentioned the tumor in, a very light-hearted kind of way, but he did mention it.
Yeah, he did, and kind of all made sense, and when he had initially mentioned it to me, I didn't there was no part of me thinking, "Oh, this is someone who's had cancer, what if it comes back?" It never
Mm.
hit me, but then when it did, I kind of I felt like I had been remiss at some point or hadn't listened to him deeply enough even. Maybe he did have it on our first date and didn't know how to tell me. So it just all played into this questioning in my mind when I was like, I can't ask him directly. It's insensitive of me to bring up these
Mhm.
things, but there were genuine concerns and questions running through my head, like, what's going on here?
And sounds like such an impossible line to walk, right? Like caring deeply, but feeling like it's too soon to really stake a claim in his life. How did that uncertainty about your role shape the way you showed up in the next stage of the relationship? Like, did it make you hold back or did it actually pull you in deeper?
It definitely pulled me in deeper because I felt like I didn't have the right to ask too much or push too hard. And I ended up just accepting whatever he gave me. If he
Mm.
shared a little, I treated it like this gift that, he felt comfortable, and if he went silent, I told myself not to complain, to give him space because he's going through a lot. And so that uncertainty about my role really kept me on my toes. And it became like I was auditioning for this place in his
Mm.
life. I wanted to prove that I could be supportive without being demanding and that I could be this easygoing, flexible, strong person. And that meant I ignored a lot of the mixed signals. And it's all because I didn't think I'd earned the position yet to
Mm.
challenge them. And so looking back, that's when I started to shrink myself and bend around whatever he needed in that moment. And of course, that only pulled me in further.
Yeah. So you're over there bending and shrinking and proving yourself while he's really only giving you these crumbs to work with. Did you recognize that imbalance at the time, or did it just feel like part of the deal because of everything that was going on with him?
At the time, I didn't really see it as an imbalance. It just kind of felt like part of the deal. I kept telling myself, of course, he can't give me more now. He's got
Oh.
cancer. He has kids. His mum's in town. He's juggling so much. And so instead of recognizing that I was running on these crumbs, I reframed it as me being this compassionate, patient, understanding
Mm.
woman that he'd just brought into his life. And so I thought that's what love's supposed to look like in that moment. It wasn't until much later that I realized I was justifying behavior that would have been unacceptable otherwise. But
Oh.
back then, I wore it almost like this badge of honor, like, look at how supportive I can be. Look how much I can carry without asking for anything back.
Inevitably, of course, the relationship starts to spill just beyond the two of you, and you start to introduce him to people in your life. What were those first interactions with the people closest to you like?
So the first person I wanted to introduce him to was my friend Wayne. And I had known Wayne for a long time and I really trust Wayne's judgment. And
Mm.
so naturally I was like, okay, well, I'm going to bring him into my world to meet my people. I will see how he goes with Wayne. And so we had planned to have a lunch together, but he was actually really unwell. He was taking oral chemotherapy and he'd mistakenly doubled his chemo dose. So by the time he was ready to go, he'd been vomiting for hours. And so we rearranged and eventually he decided he would come to my house and him and Wayne would meet there. And so after he'd arrived, which he was super late for, but understandably, I went out and I remember seeing him and just thinking, oh my God, he's lost so much weight. And he just looked completely different to the man that I'd first met. So I greeted him in the driveway and I remember he was so pale and sweaty
Mm.
and I just wanted to like wrap him in a blanket and protect this guy.
Yeah.
And so I brought him in. And part of the deal of meeting Wayne at my house was meeting my mum because mum and I share
Mm.
a home. And so mum was there briefly and despite how he looked and how sick he'd been, he turned on the charm straight away and he hugged my mum for a little bit longer than she's used to. He complimented how young she looked. That was his way. And so the introduction with mum was out of the way, which had me a little bit anxious.
Mm.
But it was fine. My mum is a beautiful, lovely human
Yeah.
being. But the main part of this meeting was for him to connect with Wayne. And Wayne's always been this incredible read of people. Like he can size someone up and mirror their energy in seconds. And the two of them just clicked instantly. And even though Danny was sick, he was still so effusive and so animated. Like he couldn't help but perform a little. He'd been talking and laughing and then one minute he'd suddenly have to excuse himself to the bathroom and have a vomit because of the
Mm.
chemo. And then he returned to the room shirtless and still in these high spirits. So,
Mm.
it was a strange interaction, but it still felt like a relief. So there was even this moment where he asked Wayne, half joking, how do I make Jesse fall in love with me? And Wayne, of course, answered, but then I think it was only a few moments later and it really surprised me because I'd never heard Wayne talk like this before, but he
Mm.
kind of shot back that he'd kill him if he ever hurt me. And we
Yeah.
kind of all laughed it off at the time. The two of the most important men in my life were meeting and getting along. And even though I could see how sick Danny was, seeing Wayne connect with him only made me feel more certain about letting him deeper into my life.
Of course, I wasn't the only one watching all of this unfold. As we tell this story, you will hear from people close to Jess, and one of the most important people in Jess's life is Wayne. He's been there through thick and thin, and he was right there when Daniel first stepped into Jess's world. So before we go further, let's bring Wayne into the conversation. I asked him what it was like meeting Daniel for the first time and how he read the situation back then.
Hi, I'm Wayne. I'm 41, a former registered nurse with a mental health specialty. I spent 7 years working in ED and mental health, both here and in the United Kingdom. But for the last 15 years, I've worked in the corporate sector in HR, people and culture. Jesse and I have known each other for a very long time, primarily through high school and when we both lived in the UK. But our friendship really blossomed once I moved back in 2010, and she's my ride or die, my heart harmony. 3 words to describe Jess. She's very intelligent. She is stubborn, but she's resilient. I think those are the 3 best descriptors for our relationship over all those years. She's the family I always wish I had, and now I've got it. Her family is more my family than my own, so we're pretty close.
Jess, 3 words for Wayne. I'm just going to start this by saying you missed one.
I'm the funniest person you've ever met.
Thank you. That's exactly where I was going. Wayne is probably one of the most considerate people I know in all kinds of ways. He is funny, not as funny as I am, but he's funny. He can keep up.
We'll leave the listeners to make a judgment on that.
Wayne is also, there's lots of words. I think the most beautiful thing about Wayne is how much love he exudes, but how that is reserved for people that deserve it. So he's not just like handing it out, you know what I mean?
Just handing out the love.
Yeah, there's probably about 5 people in the world that I would
But
go
boy,
with
do you
that,
love
but
them.
I love them deeply. Yeah.
To start with, what was your first impression of Daniel?
I think my first impression was, I'd heard a lot about Daniel in the beginning of their relationships, and I came over to Jess's house to meet him one afternoon. A very vivacious, confident man walked in the room, a little overwhelmed because it was a little love bomb. There was a lot of affection and hugs and how amazing I am as a person, which is a little bit interesting. But
What did that look like? So what was some of that amazing? So you'd only known each other for a few minutes at that point, but some of those anecdotes.
You're the most handsome man. Look at that jawline. You're a movie star. And look, we all love our vanity to be stroked. So that was nice. But then it was a little bit sort of strange, full on at the very beginning.
Yeah.
He played the guitar for me the first day.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
He did a little impromptu, here's a song about Jessica.
I must have repressed that memory.
So I'm not sure if he only knows 3 or 4 chords, but I mean, it worked for the Beatles. So yeah. And I remember he was unwell because he was delayed coming to meet us. So he had to stop a few times because he was unwell. But he was quite a vivacious, confident man.
And how many times have you been in that sort of situation with, meeting a new partner of Jess's? Is that like a normal? Would Jess usually say, I want you to come and meet this person that I've just started dating? Or was this a unique situation?
No, there's been a few times in our life where Jess has introduced me to new humans in her life. I guess given where we are at life, this was probably a little bit more serious than we've had in, the past.
Well, really, when was the time when you weren't there when I first met that person?
Exactly.
So we met them together.
Most of the times, the men that Jessica's dated, I've either been there or, been very close to
it was
that
in your
situation.
house.
So meeting a new person, that was probably the first time that's probably ever happened in our history where
Like a formal introduction.
a formal introduction was needed or warranted.
And what did you know about Daniel before you met him?
Just through conversations with Jess that they had met and they'd been on a few dates, and was quite a nice guy and I think I respected that because Jess, because she's so independent and so she's got a life together, she knows what she wants and had been single for quite a few years. This was something important, and obviously she doesn't go into anything blindly. I'd heard lots about him and his good nature and all the lovely things he had done in the dates preceding our first formal introduction. So I was genuinely excited and happy for her that she's found someone to walk the road of life with. Yeah.
And so you left that initial meeting feeling what?
He was quite a nice guy, very he had a level of intellect. What I did notice, there was a lot of and I don't know because of the job he does, a lot of very all right, let's get to, whereas let's go
Hi, I'm
straight
Daniel.
in.
Let's talk about your childhood trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a little bit of that, which is, I'm okay with that, although I don't necessarily give a lot of myself in the professional settings. When I'm meeting new people, I will riff off of whatever their energy is giving me and try to be as honest as I can in my responses without shedding too much light on myself. And there was probably a level of intellectual sparring going on just to see who is this person. Yeah, but that all checked out and was oh, okay. Obviously, I appreciate that because I'm so close to Jess, any new beau coming into her life is going to want to know, am I a threat? Who is this person?
Yeah.
What is their actual relationship with Jess? And I think there was a level of wanting to win me over, I guess, a bit, just to make sure, put on all the pleasantries to make sure it was a successful first interaction. But I left going, oh yeah, he's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And obviously cares a lot about Jess.
It was nice for him to meet Wayne. I wanted him to meet Wayne for two reasons. One, because I wasn't sure about him myself. And I'm sure Wayne would have told me if failed.
No, but I think that's a really interesting point, because it's easy now to say I wasn't sure about this person because everything is a little bit clearer when you're looking back on something, right? But there was still that, there was a lot going on in the early days of this relationship and so much clouding the normal, but there was still that normal, I really like this person and wanting to bring him into your world. And it was meeting your family. And so I think it was more of what happens when all of these worlds come together, rather than someone's going to tell me that this isn't a good person to be around. It's interesting because and again, you would have, if Wayne had been like, not this guy, you would have probably had a reaction to that, but that's not who Daniel is.
No. And I think there's also a second element to it, and it's that when I meet someone, I want them to meet my other someone.
Yes.
And that doesn't matter if it's a love interest or not. And I guess hoping in the same way that the person that I have met who I am falling for would hit it off with my life person.
Yes.
So there was that hope.
So then in watching this all play out, so he's playing you a song on his guitar and not feeling well, and we're getting into the deep conversations and that's all happening. What were you observing in Wayne? You know him very well as well, and you would have been able to pick up on his behavior if he was feeling uncomfortable. What was that exchange like? What were you?
I didn't see the overwhelm in Wayne, but Wayne is really good at making other people feel comfortable. I could see him doing that.
Yeah, okay. That's
for
interesting.
Danni. Wayne knows a lot of things. I didn't choose it as a word, but you are one of the most intelligent people I know, have no doubt. And so Wayne can match anyone's conversation. And when Daniel was talking about what he did for a living and, the complexities around some things he was dealing with, Wayne could match that beautifully. And so it wasn't unusual, because that's what Wayne does for everyone in the world. And so it wasn't even, I hate using the word Wayne was trying. It wasn't even that you were trying to be kind and be the person. You were just being you, because that's what you're like to everybody. And I know that I'd say, I need Wayne's validation that he's the person I think he is. It wasn't that at all. I mean, it's not like I had that expectation that Wayne would be the one to go, pow, get out now. But it's just something validating about having your people like your people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think with the two of us, we had two very strong things in common, is that we're both conflict avoidant and we are over analytical on a lot of things. So I think I try to remove any of that. And when I meet new people, I always try and make sure that they feel safe and heard and seen and validated. But two things that struck me from that initial meeting, but that's in hindsight thinking about it, is with my background as a nurse, I sort of didn't sort of overstep the mark when he was being sick, and then sort of came and had a lie down, that I didn't sort of intervene. But I feel that was more sort of not because I should. I think that, that was a bit odd as to why, because usually I would sort of intervene and step in from a medical background perspective just to validate and check in on those sorts of things. And I think the gut instinct, he asked me a question around, what was the question? It was about,
how does Jessica fall in love?
And my initial reaction, which is very unlike me because I don't like conflict, but I would basically was very assertively came in and said that if you hurt this woman, I will kill you.
That was very a lot. That was unusual to hear.
A very unusual thing for me, because I would never sort of verbalize or speak that, even if I did feel it. But there was something in me that without even thinking, I was like, if you hurt this person, I will.
And you said it very like...
Yeah, like there was
the terse came out. He was just like, I will kill you. You were Liam Neeson.
Yeah.
And might I add, he is still alive.
I think one thing I've wondered about, Wayne, when I first met Jess and we started becoming friends, and she was talking to me about the people in her life, and she'd been mentioning you, and I said, oh, so Wayne's your friend, and Jess said, well, Wayne's the love of my life. And she quite openly describes you in that way. And knowing Daniel, he would have been picking up on that as, from what I'm trying to say is, he would have been picking up on it as you are a central love in Jessica's life. I'm interested if you, looking back on it, in that first meeting, could pick up any sort of what in him, how he was navigating knowing that level of competition.
I think knowing now a lot about him and knowing his patterns.
Yes.
And looking at that interaction, he was doing his assessment. That's what he would do. He was throwing a lot at Wayne and seeing what he'd get back. And that's one thing, despite everything that's happened, you cannot forget that this is an intelligent human being, a very intelligent human being, a very well-trained human being. And so I see it in all of his interactions now with people in my life. It was about throwing so much at them and seeing what he got back. And it was an assessment period. And that's what I think that was about. And yes, he was challenged by Wayne, because we did not spend a lot of time with Wayne after that.
Because that initial meeting, we touched on, my thoughts on refugee and humanitarian settlement within Australia, politics, childhood trauma, sexual abuse, a whole gamut of things, which normally you don't meet somebody and all of a sudden, boom, you are trying to find, I think, how do I tick, how do I work, and what's my rapport back and forth with being confronted with that sort of line of questioning. But like I said previously, I'm more than happy to meet someone where they're at, and I will have a response, possibly filtered, but not giving too much of myself away in the way I communicate, and put it more back on their side of what they're trying to achieve from that, I think. But it was a lot of, we went through the gamut of my basic history. So I haven't thought of it like that, but it's like going into a clinician, and it's basically a whole profile of birth to current day. Yeah.
Just when that evening, or sometime after that meeting, did Danni reflect on Wayne?
No, he had nothing negative to say about Wayne.
What did he? Not necessarily negative.
He didn't have a lot to say about Wayne. That he was a lovely guy. But then the rest of the evening was his illness. That really took over. He was unwell, and so.
And I guess in hindsight, it was after I told him where I stood on him hurting you. That's when he became, shortly after that is when he got ill and had to go and have a lay down. So potentially that was a challenge or a threat that he then had to contextualize, and how am I going to navigate that?
And did you know how unwell he was before you met him?
Yeah, I'd heard the narrative that Jess had been told.
And do you remember what Jess had said, what his diagnosis was?
Yeah, and there's parts of me, I think, oh, this is interesting. And then the the delay because of driving, and I was like, oh, if someone's getting chemo, they really probably shouldn't be driving. In my experience with oncology, it's more that you've got a driver and you shouldn't be doing long things. But then I sort of balancing that out by, he obviously cares about Jess and wants to meet her mum and myself, and he's putting his body through all of that. So there's parts of me that, when you meet new people, it's always, the balancing scale of why do people do what they do. And you always give people the benefit of the doubt, especially in the first couple of interactions,
Yeah.
Until someone shows you who they are the first time, you believe them.
That's it.
But who was he?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar
question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love hearing Wayne's take on that because he's always been such a sharp judge of character. But what strikes me is how Daniel could be so visibly unwell and still manage to come across as charming and magnetic and even funny. It's like he had this way of disarming people instantly. But I want to zoom out and get out of the detail a bit because this wasn't just about Daniel showing up sick or charming Wayne. You had this little ritual with new dates, almost like your own built-in filter system, which I have used, by the way. What was behind your 3-question quiz? And what were you really trying to figure out about people in those early moments?
The dating survey I have used for many years, and I won't repeat the questions here, but maybe we can pop it into socials if people want to give it a go. It has no predictive validity, so I have learned. Just a warning. But it was really my way of trying to shortcut the messiness of dating whilst also having a little bit of fun. Like it's an icebreaker essentially. And so I'd ask these 3 questions to see how someone thought, how they handled a little bit of pressure as well, and whether they could be playful with me essentially. And so on the surface, it was lighthearted, but underneath, I think it was also me trying to control the unknown of a new person. And so if they answered what I considered to be correctly, then maybe I could feel safe enough to let them in a little bit more.
And the wild part is that Danny passed the test, but later you've called him the most hazardous person you've ever known. How do you make sense of that contradiction now?
Okay, well, as I said, there was no predictive validity with this survey. I hadn't tested it a lot in an empirical setting. However, the thing with Danny is he is brilliant at performing just enough to pass. And so he was witty, he was self-deprecating, he could disarm people in seconds. And so in that moment, he ticked the boxes I thought mattered. But what I didn't realize then was that the test only measured charm. It didn't dig deep into character. So yeah, he passed this little survey I had, but in the long run, he failed every real measure of what a partner should be. And that contradiction is what still blows my mind because how easily I was sold on surface level cues when what really mattered was hidden underneath.
And this connects to something deeper in you because you've talked about being anxious, but also very good at masking it. How did that part of you, the anxious side that hides itself so well, play into the way you connected with him?
Well, masking has basically become my second language. As I said, not many people around me would see me as this anxious person. I can present calm, confident, and together, even when I'm underneath, I'm knotted with anxiety. And with Danny, that played right into the dynamic because he was this chaotic, inconsistent, wild guy, and that fed my anxiety. But instead of showing it, I masked it harder. And so I kept trying to be this easy partner for him, the one who could handle anything, who wouldn't scare him off. And in hindsight, I think the masking actually made me more vulnerable to the setting we were walking into. And so it meant he never had to see the toll his behavior was taking. And I never gave myself permission to admit how badly it was affecting me. And so I just kept performing this calm, even though I was crumbling inside. So I guess in a way we were both kind of performing, right?
Yeah. If we can, let's just pull the lens back even further and touch on your childhood a bit. You've often talked about there being a golden version and a darker version. Which do you think Danny tapped into more?
Yeah. So the golden version is all about this warmth and closeness. And I've had that especially with my mum. That version is about loyalty and protection and never leaving someone behind. And Danny absolutely tapped into that. Every time he looked vulnerable or fragile, it activated that part of me that wants to care or hold on no matter what's going on. But then there is also the darker version, the part where love feels tied to chaos or instability. And Danny tapped into that too, whether he meant to or not. It was like both versions of my childhood were alive in that relationship.
Yeah, and you've told me that you were glued to your mum growing up. Do you see echoes of that attachment with him?
Definitely. With mum, I was always right there. Like, I was fused to her as a child, and that closeness showed me her selflessness. My mum often prioritized other people's needs above her own. And with Danny, I fell into that role super quickly, orbiting around him, trying to soothe, trying to stay close even when it hurt. It was like I reverted to that attachment style without even realizing it.
And then there's your dad, which is a whole other force in your story, because he was authoritarian, then unraveled into chaos. Do you think that history made you more vulnerable to Danny?
Yeah, with dad, I learned to adapt quickly, learning to read the room, to shrink myself, to manage someone else's volatility before it exploded. That survival skill has never really left me. And so when Danny's chaos came along, part of me thought, I know how to do this. I've done it
Yes.
before. But the thing is, as a kid, you don't have a choice. As an adult, you do, and yet I didn't exercise it. I went straight back into those old patterns like they were muscle memory.
Obviously, you have a lot of people around you who care deeply for you. How did your network of people help keep you grounded through all of this?
Before I moved into this relationship, friendships were my everything. I was really proud of the people I had in my life. And so they truly were lifelines. Each of you had reflected back to me a version of myself I couldn't always see when I was with Danny. And so with you, Keeks, it was the constant questions. You were there and you made me think harder about things in a really gentle way. And with Wayne, it was his humor and his broad perspective on things. Even when I was in the thick of it, those friendships were this tether. And while that year I was reasonably isolated from everybody, the little reminders that I wasn't crazy, that I was still me, even if I did feel completely lost and out of body at times.
So, if we look at something you've said before, some choices don't feel like choices at all. Looking back now, do you feel like you chose Danny or did he choose you?
In the moment, I felt like I was choosing him. I told myself I was saying yes and that I was leaning in and that I was the one deciding. But with hindsight, it feels like he chose me, or maybe he saw me coming even. He knew how
Yeah.
to perform, how to hook into the soft spots, my vulnerabilities, and even to activate those old patterns in me. So, no, it doesn't feel like a clean choice. It feels like a collision, really. And a collision didn't fully understand until much later, and that I'm not sure I even understand now.
In the next episode, we'll move beyond these early chapters and into how Jess and Daniel's relationship really took shape. When charm turned into control, and when Jess started to feel the ground turn into quicksand beneath her. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is just the beginning, and trust me, it only gets messier from here. We'll see you next time on Beyond Curious. A huge thank you to Fat Shouty for gifting us her beautiful song. Her voice carries the heart of this podcast, and we are so proud to have her music with us on this journey.